Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of PPC Town Hall. My name is Fred Valles, and I'm your host. So today's topic is PPC scripts, Google Ad scripts, Google AdWords scripts, anything to help you with automation of your PPC account management. Now, I'm obviously a huge fan of scripts. I've been talking about them for a very long time. I've put many of my scripts for free on search engine land. But what we wanted to do today was bring in a couple of other experts, some of the world's leading experts on scripts themselves, and people I've had the pleasure of speaking with and alongside at many conferences. So the goal for today is to give you an introduction to scripts. So even if you don't know how to program, you've never written a single line of code, scripts are still very useful for you. It's as easy as copy and pasting. I will show you some scripts that you can get started with right after the session today. But then we have the experts on the call, so we also want to open it up to questions. So remember, we're live. If you put some chats in the comments on YouTube or Facebook, we'll be showing those on the screen. We'll do our very best to answer them. So we got some great people on the call today. So let's go ahead and talk about All right, so I want to welcome my guests today, the world's experts on scripts. Nils, I've got you right next to me on the screen, so we'll start with you. Nils Rooijmans from the Netherlands. How are you doing today?
Oh, good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
How are things in the Netherlands?
Currently, it's amazing. It's sunny actually in Amsterdam. Yes, it does happen. We have a great spring and summertime. So currently I'm sitting at the houseboat enjoying the view of the canals with the little boats and sunshine. So it's a good day.
And we also have Steve Hammer, also known as The Hammer, joining us today. How's it going, Steve?
Quite well, quite well. With that dramatic intro, I was worried I was going to have to, get out the first-person shooter kind of mode, and we were going to start streaming Call of Duty or something. It was beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, thank you. It's uplifting, right? And I noticed you have a gaming chair behind you, so I guess that's...
Yeah, I a little bit, but more than anything, I buy gamer stuff because if it can survive a gamer, it can survive me. Simple as that. They push their equipment as hard as possible, so I just buy all their stuff and figure it's the best.
And I guess they sit in their chair for way too many hours a day, so...
Exactly, yeah. That's kind of the philosophy.
Rough, right? Yeah. So Nils, we have your fun fact there. So you were selling search ad on a CPM basis on Ilse. What's Ilse?
That's a long time ago. Yes. Back in the Netherlands, late 90s, I was working at a Dutch search engine, Ilse.nl. That was before Google came along and, of course, took all the market share that we had prior to Google becoming the world dominating search engine. But I was responsible for the search engine, and back then we didn't even have a business model for search engines, as in we were part of a bigger media company that was generating all kinds of content on the portal, as it was called, and the search engine was a way to attract the people to the portal. And we were actually selling ads based on a CPM basis, the banner ads, but also search ads based on a CPM basis. So we developed sort of like a predecessor to a PPC advertising engine like a Google Ads or Overture, as it was called in GoTo back in the days. But yeah, we had our own software solution for that, and we were selling it on a CPM basis back then. That was quite interesting.
Were you already on the technology side back then, or were you just more marketing?
Actually, I started off as from the technology side. I studied artificial intelligence in the 90s, and after that, I decided to try to make use of this knowledge about intelligent machines to improve the quality of the ranking algorithms in the search engine. So that's how I actually got involved into search marketing.
Nice.
So I sort of shifted from a technology guy to a sort of like a marketeer.
Well, it seems like you come full circle, right? But going back into scripts now.
There you go.
What about you, Steve? What's your background like?
Well, I have one of the weirdest backgrounds I think possible. Started as a chemical engineer, which of course makes perfect sense how you would get into search in the first place. Went back to school, got an MBA, and then went to work for a newspaper. And much like a lot of other folks in the industry at the time, they were trying to figure out how to do a digital transformation. And at that point, I had to learn everything I could ever want to know about SEO and PPC. So, and I didn't know the history of it. And the beauty was that was doing it at scale, because they're the amount of content that they're turning out is massive. So that threw me back into it, and then since then I've been everything from doing startups for Match and obviously my own thing.
So was there any technology in that background of yours?
I've always been around it. It's pretty interesting. I'm not a programmer by nature or anything like that, but I've always used it just in what I was doing. Although hilariously, like, it was Fortran even back in the days. God, I'm old, aren't I? All of those languages were the ones that I was working with. So I've always been around it way more than, and literally my first job when I was in high school was actually programming in Pascal. But it's never been my 100% full-time job of as a programmer. It's just always sort of been a hack in general, and knowing that as far as things go is why I know that everyone can do this.
Exactly. Sometimes that's all you need, right? Is take a piece of code somebody else has written and then start hacking on it. Yep. Hey, for the people watching, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and I'm curious if any people watching have written scripts, have technology backgrounds, or are going to be more on the copy and paste side of things here.
Exactly, because maybe that's interesting to mention as well, because since both Steve and I imagine you as well, Fred, have a background in technology, for scripts it's really not necessary. As in, we can create our own scripts, of course, but even if you don't know anything about coding, even if you are afraid of code, you can still make use of scripts and put them to the best use.
Talk a little bit more about that, right? So why is it so easy? Like, what's the level of expertise that you find you need to be able to get started?
I think you already mentioned it. It's just it is as simple as copy and paste, literally. As in, there's so many scripts out there. I think there's over 500 scripts you can find on the web. I'm maintaining a list and I'm trying to discover them all, but I'm still not finished. But there's hundreds of scripts out there that you can easily copy and paste and use like within 10 to 20 minutes. You can have them running in your account. So even without any JavaScript knowledge, you can start using them.
Absolutely. I think even Google's own scripts are a great place to start, right? The ones that are in the solution sections of their developers stuff, they're written, they're well documented, they're constantly updated, or at least kept up to snuff. So you can feel pretty confident about them, and they're not doing anything funny like sending verification to a third-party server or doing anything that's shady by any stretch that you would ever have to worry about with those.
So have you actually run into that? Have you seen scripts that try to steal information?
I haven't. It's one of the beauties, I think, of the scripts community in the first place. Everybody that's involved with it and everybody that posts is doing it very altruistically, right? It's the hacker part of my head that goes into that there could be a problem with this, but I've literally never seen it. And if you see like code base 64 or something that just makes no sense in a script, just to run the other way as fast as you can. But those, I've literally never seen one. Nils, have you? You've got a bigger list than I do in terms of this.
No, I haven't seen examples of actually sharing like data from your account with third parties. But what I have seen happening is that people use custom integration. I think it was Russell Savage who documented how to keep track of where your script is running, in which accounts your script is running, by pinging Google Analytics. So you could use Google Analytics to track what other accounts are running your scripts. You might. I'm not sure if you want to use that, but a lot of scripts are using that as well.
And I think that code is no longer working. I tried to use it a couple of weeks ago, but out of the box, it didn't work anymore. And by the way, Russ Savage, so he was the guy behind Free AdWords Script. He kind of stopped contributing to that site, and we took it over, hoping that we'd contribute more to it, but we also haven't been able to do that. So
we should make it a joint effort.
Yeah, exactly. We should make it a new resource, right? But that also kind of brings up the point that with a script, so you have a list of 300. It's always tricky because not all of them will still work because Google changes how things operate. And so unless you're actively maintaining those scripts, they may just fail to do what they're supposed to do. How do you deal with that? Like, do you guys have a schedule that you go back, update scripts, or do you kind of figure they're going to expire? And
I was going to say, from our own perspective, even the ones we run and maintain, you see them break, so then you can go back and update them yourself, right? Everything I've written that isn't that extensive of a list, we're probably running it. So you can see if it breaks in that regard. But the broader list and things like that, it's not uncommon for me to see somebody put stuff in the comments. The beauty, though, is I think in the last year or so, I don't think there's been a single update to anything in scripts.
Right, and that's because the API is transitioning for Google. So they have a new Google Ads API, and that was supposed to be what we were using, but then it was massively broken or too slow, and they pulled back on that. But as they are transitioning to that, they also said we're not going to update the old API anymore. And thanks to that having been static now since September of 2018, it also means our scripts haven't been breaking. But as soon as they get back to the regular update cycles, it's going to be roughly 3 or 4 times a year that we might have to make changes.
Yeah.
It's been kind of nice. But the downside is that there's been no new functionality.
Yep.
There you go.
Exactly.
Like how long did we have to wait to actually get access to the price extensions?
Right. So and that's one of the latest things they did add, right? So talk a bit about that, the price extensions.
Yeah, so price extensions, of course, are very popular extensions that you can use in your Google Ads accounts to display actual prices, but prices tend to change quite often. So if you have different products and your product owner or the marketeer is changing the prices of the products because of inventory or competition, then you would like the price extensions to be updated with the most actual price. And up until I think 6 months ago, it was impossible to update them via scripts. But fortunately, now we can access price extensions via the scripts API. So we can use scripts to keep them in sync.
Yeah, what I want to show here on the screen is where people go to figure out what is sort of possible with scripts. So we've got the Google Ad scripts reference pages. So Nils, maybe talk us through, like, how would you figure out price extensions if that's available? What's your process like?
Right. So let's see, you're in the Google Ad scripts reference documentation. So on the left side, you have a menu of all the different components within the Ads app. And as you can see, there will be ad extensions. So if you click on that one, there you go. And then prices. So for instance, let's say click on the price builder actually, which would create a.
Yeah, and the deep linked pages for some reason keep all coming back with no internet connection. Okay, but that's good, right? So this is kind of the way that you figure out what might be available. And then once you get to that final page, it has usually a code sample or an explanation of how to use it. And so for the people who haven't used scripts, so as you can see here, they connect with ads, keywords, bids, budgets, extensions, all the different types of campaigns. So you have shopping campaigns, video campaigns, search campaigns, display campaigns. They handle placements. So it's a fairly exhaustive list, but it's not everything, right? So something like
Yeah, and to be honest, this is very seldomly my starting point. Actually, I just use the Google search engine for this. So for instance, if I would be interested in updating price extensions via scripts, I would do a Google search on Google Ad scripts price extensions. And most probably there will be a listing from the Google Ad script support forum that already has an answer on how to access the price extensions via scripts, but I'm not 100% sure if it.
Yeah, so we just did that search right there, and we do come back. It's the first result. So Google is working.
Yep.
Great search engine. We love it.
was going to say that Nils is, I think that's one of the cool things about scripts in the first place, right? Isn't it that we get this functionality and then we kind of figure out dozens of ways we can apply that menu across things. It's the fun of it, and imagining the things you can do with it. Like, oh man, this is a pain in the butt for updating all of these prices all the time. And then you get the script that can do it. Now you've saved your time. That use case gets really powerful.
Yeah. So let's talk about the ideation process. By the way, maybe at some point we need to have Ted GQ on the call and ask him what his workout regimen is for getting that nice six-pack right there.
Yeah, he's not on the COVID-19 plan like I am. Just he gained 15 pounds during COVID.
What is that? The COVID-15?
COVID-19. I'm
COVID-19. Right. Sorry.
COVID-19.
Right. So yeah, what's the ideation process, right? So when do you think about scripts as a way to, as something you might even want to use, right? So both of you run agencies, you do SEO, you do PPC. At what point do you say, listen, we need to do this sort of strategy, we need to execute on this, and it's just taking too much manual work, we need to script it? Like, what's that process like?
That you just hit exactly the word that I like to use. This is taking too much manual work. Mm-hmm. It 9 times out of 10, it's brought about out of some level of laziness, on my own part or otherwise, or just the ability to scale, right? Right now I'm doing a lot with search query reports, and pulling those down and making sure, from n-grams to sort of you name it, because I'm worried so much about matching as of late. And a lot of my clientele is business to business. So since I'm spending so much time in search query reports, I want them sent and automated to me and find easy ways to push them back. And that's really where I've been focusing personally a lot on scripts. I just want to take the work load off.
And who was it? Bill Gates, who said that he prefers to hire lazy engineers because lazy engineers don't like to do manual work. So they'll figure out like the best process for scaling it and automating it. I guess that's kind of what you're saying, right? So yeah, be lazy, try to get the computer to do the work for you. One component of that, though, is that I think you have to have a process that's really well defined. And process is so important, right? So if you say, I download that specific report, and then I do a VLOOKUP on these columns, and then I look for these metrics, and then I put a filter on these metrics, and that basically gives me my decision automatically, and there's no more like thought process at that point. That's ideal for automation. That's ideal for a script.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, 100% agree. And actually that formed the basis of my current company, because I don't run a traditional agency as in with an office building and people on the floor. It's like more like a remote boutique PPC agency with people working for me all over the world. But in order to manage the team, I needed to have like standardized processes. So when I started building the company, I decided to document almost every part of the account optimization process that I would like to use to service my clients. And then when I finished the documentation, I started trying to automate as much as possible using scripts. And that is actually a great strategy to come up with the best tasks to automate, because then you're not spending time building something that you're never going to use, like scripts that you can use for something that is a one-time off. In my experience, it doesn't always make sense to automate it.
That's kind of the worst mistake, isn't it? When you're like, oh, I've got a cool idea to automate this, and it turns out that you just could have done it that once. You spent 12 hours building the script.
Right, but then
on the other side,
yeah, and you're probably going to go there as well. But for Optimizer, it's like, well, we have a really cutting edge customer who tries to do something, so we figure let's build a tool for it, and then there's probably others who would want to do this, except it's been too time consuming. And then you can actually sell that solution. And so as an agency, now you have a service that you can actually pitch, because it's not going to take you 17 hours to do that thing. And now you can just automate it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think also on the other side, looking at what is possible using scripts, you come up with other ideas to testing your accounts that you would not do because you simply do not have the time to do it manually. Like, for instance, doing n-gram analysis is something that is very tedious and takes up a lot of time. If you have a script doing it for you, or that scripts can do it for you, the probability of you actually doing that kind of analysis will increase if you have the tools to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
To what degree have you found that your agencies have benefited from scripts?
ooh, I could not live without them. Definitely not.
Same.
And have you looked at it in terms of like how many fewer people that you have to hire, more work that can be done automatically, retaining more control, performance? Do you look at those metrics, or is that kind of like you know it's working?
To be honest, I don't really measure it. And I think the biggest benefit for me personally in my agency is that I do not have to worry about quality assurance of the work of my team. As in, I know the scripts are monitoring everything. So if they make a mistake, the scripts will notice and they will immediately send out an alert to the people in the team. Or if it's a big mistake, then I will be alerted as well. But that way I can easily travel the world. Well, I used to travel the world, not these days, but I like traveling. So I want to be offline as much as possible, but I have to be sure that everything is in control. So
Yeah.
I want to be alerted if something goes haywire. That is my biggest use case.
Warning that this will be a little long-winded, so I apologize in advance. We went to a new model pretty recently called cost per deliverable, where we just charge people a fixed amount for things that we do. So we launch an experiment, that's a cost, that's so many points and all that kind of good stuff. Scripts allow me to do that a lot more efficiently. And it's not an hours discussion anymore. It's a much more efficient way. And people love, at least our clients seem to love it from the perspective of, okay, I know I launched something. They don't really care necessarily how it got launched. They care that it got launched well and efficiently and whatever else. And then it runs efficiently. Both of those things can occur in that world without having to have those discussions. And it allows me to take that expertise and actually value it in a way that getting things to deliverables rather than time, right? Because we only have so much time. But if I can push out an extra deliverable a day, that's that much better. So that's
right, because that's what you're building on.
Measuring how this works, if you will.
Now, so when it comes to your agencies, is it both of you just writing the scripts, or have you hired people?
Both. Actually, I love freaking out with scripts because you can really get lost in them and have a lot of fun. But if I'm also the business owner, and from a business owner's perspective, it doesn't make sense for me to write the scripts myself, because a real JavaScript developer, I know how to code JavaScript. I wouldn't say I'm the best developer, definitely not. And someone who's doing it full time is way more productive in writing the scripts than I am. So from a business perspective, for me, it makes sense to out-task writing the scripts. But since I enjoy it and I also want to be, up to date with the latest features and possibilities, I tend to write, at least one script a month just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, it's me. I generally write them, and it's not like Nils is right. I probably could be a lot more efficient if I hired somebody who is a true JavaScript or other things like that. But since most of them are bred out of my own sort of problems, if you will, or frankly, a lot of them are still copy and paste. I'm taking from the list that's out there as much as anybody else is, and that doesn't take nearly as much time at all. So it ends up falling on my shoulders a lot.
Yeah. And I think, Nils, you were alluding to the fact that there's a lot of JavaScript developers out there, but one issue that I find is that JavaScript developers know how to code, but they have no clue about Google Ads. And the notion that there are campaigns that contain ad groups that contain ads and keywords, and then those are attached to extensions, like that is mumbo jumbo. That doesn't make sense unless you work in this industry. And that's why you can almost spend as much time speccing something out to that level of detail where they exactly know what to do. And so then becomes a question, right? So do you just write it yourself, or do you spend all that time speccing and then reviewing and potentially having to get them to fix it? So like if you can find a JavaScript developer who also has done specifically Google Ad scripts in the past, like that is gold, because they know our world, they know coding, and they can just, and so you can literally go to them and say, I need a keyword report, and they'll just know, oh, well, then they probably also need to know the ad group that the keyword lives in and the campaign that it lives in, because unless you know those two things, you couldn't take that keyword or search term and make it a negative because you don't know where to put that keyword. Right. So we found a couple of people that have those skills, and it pays off.
Yeah, agree with that. So definitely, I think it's easier to hire someone who already knows the Google Ads JavaScript API, the libraries and the functions they can use and the methods, but is a mediocre JavaScript developer compared to like a real senior JavaScript developer without any knowledge of Google Ads and the API.
Yeah.
And the beauty of all of that, and just to build on what you guys are saying, is most of these aren't 2,000 line JavaScript programs. You know, they're very small, most of the time very basic, to what some people are, you know, like what a React developer might be doing. They laugh at what we do, right, by comparison. So you know, it's a little bit different in terms of the level you need. I think, Nils, you hit it right on the head. A mediocre JavaScript programmer is fine, and that's probably why I can do these.
Yeah, and you know, one of the points that I keep making a lot currently is about automation layering. And it's sort of like when we think about automation in the PPC context, we're so fed all the inputs by Google about its machine learning, it's artificial intelligence. It's like super complicated, expensive stuff to build. And so we're saying like, oh, should we build a bid management system, a bid management automation that's better than Google's? Well, no. I mean, you're never going to be able to do that as a one-man developer or a one-woman developer, right? So, but what we can do is we can take Google, who's done some amazing machine learning bid management, and we can put controls on that. So like Nils, you were saying, put a monitoring script in place that tells you if maybe that automated bidding system is going off the rails. And Steve, I think in the many sessions that we've done together, you make one of the points that when you want to get started with scripts, start with something that's reporting, that's going to notify you. It doesn't make changes. It just tells you something, right? It's safe. Yep. It's not going to mess up your account. So that's a really good place to start. And that's automation layering, because a lot of these scripts don't have to be complicated. And we'll take a look at one of these scripts here in a minute to give people a sense of what it looks like. So Nils, I've opened up one of your scripts here. And by the way, all the URLs, all the scripts that we're sharing, they're going to be in the show notes on the website later today, or you can search for it. So you recognize this one?
Yeah, that's actually one of my latest. This idea came up during the COVID crisis. What I saw happening in the search behavior of the search query reports in one of my accounts was that it would completely different search queries were entering the reports, and I was like, okay, these could be opportunities, or these could be things that we need to negate immediately because we're wasting spend. And I sort of decided that because this dramatic thing happening in the world right now could have a dramatic impact of the search behavior of the target audiences, we need to be alerted if something dramatic is changing in the search query reports. So that was the origin of the idea to write this script. So basically what it does, it has a look at the search query report for last week and compares it to the week before, or for instance, last month to the month before. And it reports search terms with huge discrepancies in either impression volume or click volume.
Right.
And then you get an email with a link to a Google Sheets that shows the differences. And you can actually use it to start negating queries that show up but are completely irrelevant, or use it in a way that you can improve the performance for these search terms by adding them as a keyword, or as some other person, Anna Borger, if I remember correctly, she actually used it to identify products to add to a smart shopping campaign. So she was using the script to discover search terms that were trending in her client's account, and combined it with data in Google Analytics to discover products that were really relevant related to these trending search terms. And she added these products to a smart shopping campaign to see to actually take advantage of this incline in the search volume, which was a nice use case, I guess. So that is a way that you can actually layer these different automation systems together to improve the overall performance of
so let's take a look at that script and go through it a little bit section by section, because you said it can do many things, right? And so for context, here's an example in Google Trends. It shows that searches for cancel my trip really spiked at the beginning of COVID. And so this was the example, right? If you're selling trips, selling flights, book hotel bookings, like you don't really want to pay for searches on cancel my trip, which all of a sudden shot up. But how do you know that that's a trending search query? So that's what this script does, right? So, but now to get started with this, you copy and paste this whole script into your Google Ads account. And then generally a well-written script has a couple of sections, right? So Nils, so you have your first section here, adding your configuration. That is generally all people have to fill out for something to at least work at the base level. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. So what's happening here is that in green, these are the comments. So it's basically text that the interpreter ignores. It's not part of the JavaScript code. It's only there to explain what is happening. And then you have like 3 variables, and the variables, you have to provide some value to it. So you have, in this case, you have to provide the spreadsheet URL that is being used as the output. And you have to add your email address that the script uses to send the alert to, and the email subject, which you can leave as is, but you can replace the XYZ with your client-specific name.
Right.
So
right. And then you have that second section, which is sort of the optional changes.
Exactly. So these are, for instance, like the script ignores search terms that have less than 10 impressions. So it only looks at search terms that have a minimum volume, as you would say. And there's lower limits to the relative difference. So for instance, if you had like 100 searches impressions last week, and now it's 98, then the difference really isn't significant. So let's ignore that. But if the difference is above 20%, then we include it in the sheet, and we will send out an alert. And of course, you can change the thresholds depending on what you prefer and what you think is relevant for your account.
Exactly. And then we get to the stuff you shouldn't touch below this line, and that's the main code.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is, if you're not familiar with JavaScript, just don't touch it. Read it. I always recommend people to read the scripts. So actually, I do JavaScript and Google Ads scripting training as well. And one of the first things I do in the training is, of course, explain the basic concept of JavaScript. So if you're really interested in learning how scripts work, that will be a great start. Learn the basics of JavaScript. And once you understand the basics, you should be able to sort of like read the code and get a glimpse of what is happening. So you sort of get a feeling what the script is doing. And that way you will both feel more comfortable in running the script because you sort of know what's going on. And you will also start to recognize opportunities to change the logic of the script to better suit your account-specific needs.
Yeah. So for example, here, and Steve Wayne as well, if you want to, suggest some changes to the script. But here we have the AWL query, so the AdWords language query. And you notice that we're pulling impressions. But if you wanted to do something that was based on not just like spikes in impressions, but spikes in clicks, you could probably go and change that parameter right there, the metric, to the clicks metric. Right. So you would kind of do a find and replace almost throughout the whole script. Find for all the instances of impressions and change them with clicks. And 99% sure that would probably work, right? There might be 1 or 2 things broken. And the compiler would tell you like, oh, well, in this case, we don't recognize the word clicks because maybe Google calls it something else in that context, or maybe they use an uppercase or a lowercase, that type of thing.
Right. And also what is, I think, if you start thinking about scripts this way, it's also very important to realize that once you understand the difference between previewing a script and running a script, you feel very comfortable in making minor tweaks and minor modifications to the actual code, because if you preview it, nothing will change in the account. Yeah. Previewing the script will make sure that nothing in your account is being changed by the script. So then you can actually start testing if your changes make sense.
Steve, you were saying you're a copy paster, right? So what would you would go to existing scripts and just kind of like pull out the functions and the sections that you like and recombine them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think in blocks, which I think is the JavaScript way of thinking in the first place, right? this function does this, that function does that kind of thing, and letting things flow through until you get all the pieces that you need. In a lot of cases, those things are at least partially built already, so you don't have to start from raw. So, for example, the account anomaly script, which I think is it's a classic. It's a Google written script. It's one that I run an awful lot. It's really easy to adjust that script for the things that you're looking for in your anomalies once you just understand a few pieces of it, and that's a pretty good basis. Like Nils' script right there, if I were modifying it, I would probably play around with messing with looking for cost spikes in particular keywords if those things were going on, to do more or less the same idea. But some folks, have their concerns about that. So, when everything's going to one keyword, that's when you start to worry, right?
Yeah. And so speaking of anomalies, so it is a classic. It is available from Google. But when COVID started, I got the idea that it's no longer just about anomalies, but it's also an anomaly at a certain geographic level, because literally from city to city, there's different restrictions. So it's very hard for me to know if I was advertising for a business in a different state, like what's actually happening there. Are certain search terms impacting what's happening? And so this is not even looking at the search terms. This is straight up metrics. So it says for each location, let's look at the historical patterns for a typical Tuesday. And then let's compare that to last Tuesday. And if that was more than 20%, say, different, then it tells you, hey, in San Mateo County, something is happening. Or in the Netherlands, the numbers are unusually good. And so now I know to go and do my investigation and maybe run one of your scripts on the search query report to figure out what's happening specifically in that region that's anomalous. But what was cool about that is you can take the existing script from Google, you can sort of add that new dimension of location to it, and produce something that's completely new, but very, very relevant to today's situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Even beyond today's situation, this is a strategy I've seen before, where competitors will come in and pick off a zip code, for example. So you can see that in this sort of thing. It's beautiful.
Exactly. Steve, let's look at one of your pages here. So this is a bit old, 2018, make Skags truly Skags.
Yep.
Let's talk about account structure for a second and the script and the context. But so Skag is single keyword ad group.
Mm-hmm.
Is this still something you believe in?
I didn't believe in it even when I wrote the script.
For it?
But even so, it's something that people use and they believe in. And frankly, with matching the way it is, the Skags have been shot more times than everybody playing Borderlands 3. It's a pretty bad. It's a pretty difficult thing to run these days. I would say, because the exact dish match becomes less exact-ish all the time, which means you get bleed over in your single keyword ad groups like there's no tomorrow.
Right, you're talking about close variants, right? And so I've written scripts too that look at close variants and specifically point those out. And now you can do cool things because you can do a semantic analysis, like how many characters are different between your original keyword and the close variant that Google showed you for. And you can make a decision based on that. So you could say if it's 3 characters or fewer difference, maybe it's just a typo, maybe it's a misspelling. So that's fine, we'll keep it. But if it's more than 3 characters different, maybe they've changed some of the words. And then I prefer that doesn't happen because I do want exact to be exact. All right, so that's a script that we put out there.
Yeah. Good variants and bad variants, right? Like somebody flipped 2 letters on thing or put a parallel or put pluralize something. That's no big deal. Those are the ones I actually do want. But somebody put in or dropped a word out of an exact match query and it still matched, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Right. Because this touches on a theme that is I've been talking about and blogging about quite a lot lately, and it's that I love to use scripts to monitor what is actually happening in the Google AI, because as we all know, the Google AI is using machine learning to predict performance on clicks and trying to come up with close variant matches that are sort of have like the same search intent and hopefully the same conversion value. But as we all know, machine learning it's learning, right? And we are paying Google in the learning phase by providing Google with the money and the data to actually feed the machine. And I always try to keep track on how good the AI is doing a job for my specific account, because I do think that Google has Google is trying to optimize the performance for the whole ecosystem, and as in they're trying to come up with solutions that will benefit most advertisers, but that does not necessarily mean it will benefit your specific account. So I like to use scripts to monitor what is actually happening in my specific account. And if the AI goes haywire, I want to be alerted on that and take action on it. So for instance, with the close variants, I've created a script to monitor the performance of the real exact keyword versus the close variant. Mm-hmm. And if there's a significant difference in the performance, let's say the cost per acquisition or the ROAS, then I get an alert. So alerting me that this close variant is performing way better or way worse than the real exact match keyword, so I can take action on that. That's another example of actually layering these different types of algorithms to make the most out of it.
Yeah, it's easy for us to get on a soapbox and say it's all bad, by the way. It's not. We learn a lot from the systems, and we see opportunities that come in from these things all the time. But it also can be a challenge at times, especially we do a lot of business to business, and like one word can be very specific in the order that things are that are used. You know, milk. I always use the example: milk chocolate and chocolate milk are very different things, but in exact match variants, they kind of match the same.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess that's a little bit about your favorite scripts. Any other favorites you got right now?
Those have been some of the big ones that I've been pushing a lot. The Anomaly scripts, the exact match variants, for us are some of the big ones, because the search query reports have just been so important in terms of our performance. Bidding scripts I'm going to flip that question a little bit, Fred. The bidding script ones, nice headband, are ones that I don't use nearly as much anymore.
Yeah.
This is the sun is setting in Amsterdam, guys. So this is me trying to still see you guys. But it's a funny.
Okay, come over here. Come to California. The sun, I mean, not Nils.
I'm just coming up. Yeah, the bidding scripts now are ones that I'm using a lot less.
Let's talk about that for a second, right? So we actually get that funny question at Optimizer. So people come to us and they say, well, you know, automated bidding from Google, why don't we just use that? Like, what should I still do? And it's like, okay, even if you're automated bidding, like your queries still matter, right? Because you get all these close variants and Google is trying to automatically bid for those. But and in the case where it's not a really good close variant, they probably bid less for it. But if you could look at that and say, well, that's clearly a bad close variant, like just get that out and make that a negative keyword. And in a way, you're certainly improving your performance, kind of in a roundabout way, going through bidding without actually touching bidding. So there's all other things you can still do. You have to think about it holistically, right? You can't just say like, now I'm doing bidding and now I'm doing budgeting and now I'm doing ad text. Like AdWords is a pretty holistic thing and everything's more and more interconnected.
I think that's a great way of looking at it. The interconnectivity of AdWords is the power of it. Nothing is isolated in terms of that. It's one of the things that I think is a bit of a challenge, because our incentives are we want to only show up on relevant queries too, right? And our ability to get that data and get the irrelevant queries out and teach that system, we're very much aligned in that between Google and an advertiser, right? So, you know, that's why I spend so much time in search query report type things, rather than the bidding, and let the bidding do what it needs to do.
And then budgets, that's another one I think people are still very much into managing. And Google still doesn't really do the best job of that because they still don't even really do monthly budgets, which is the way most of our clients would think about how we spend money. And then accelerating, decelerating budgets as we get closer to the end of the month and maybe we got some additional budget we need to spend and now we need to figure out where to allocate that in the most efficient way. And so the budget, keeping the budgets on track, that's kind of a nice thing for scripts to do. Also because it's fairly binary, right? Most people will come in and say, listen, $5,000 for the month. That doesn't really change. And then the script can just look at it and do the math. We got $1,000 left and only 2 days to spend that.
Find a place.
$100 a day, right? It's pretty simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and find the good place, right? Not just any random place to throw things at. You know, it's one thing if you've got Silicon Valley startup money that wants to throw money at things, but generally speaking, everybody wants ROI on what they want to do. So finding the most efficient place to put it, perfect for scripts.
Yep. Let's talk briefly about scripts versus API versus other automations. Right. The mistake that I've certainly made personally was, like you were alluding to, you go down this rabbit hole, spend 6 hours writing this amazing script, and then you realize I should have just done it manually. But sometimes it's not even manual. Sometimes it's like, oh, wait, there's an automated rule directly in Google Ads that could have done that. And specifically, I built a script that would turn ads on and off for the weekend. And then I realized I could have done an automated rule on Friday afternoon and Sunday night. That would have done the exact same thing, and that would have taken me 2 minutes to set up. But sometimes you want to use the API because scripts time out. Scripts don't work on really massive accounts. What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, I think if you're new to scripts, start experimenting with rules, primarily because that will get you in the way of thinking about how you can use automation to help you manage the account. And rules are relatively easy to set up. Of course, there is a downside of rules that they only run. What is the current frequency? A couple of times a day? Once a day, right? And you can run scripts like every hour.
Yep.
And also with scripts, you have way more flexibility compared to rules. But for easy things like, for instance, pause every keyword that had over 100 clicks and 0 conversions. So that way you can pause keywords automatically that do not perform. That is something that you can really easily do using automated rules. And once you have experimented with a couple of these rules, you will most probably identify new opportunities to use automation to automate a lot of your optimization tasks. And that is a great first step in getting started with applying.
Yeah. My biggest frustration with automated rules is that they limit you to one date range and one scope of the thing you're looking at. So you can't really do relative comparisons. And Nils, like you were saying with the queries, it's really interesting to look at stuff that's really gaining or really declining, but that requires 2 date ranges, and an automated rule doesn't give that to you, right? So now you're limited to saying, find me all the stuff with more than 50 impressions last week. But every week you see the same things, and what we want to see is what's different. And that's not possible through a rule. And that's when you start looking at maybe putting a script in place which can pull those multiple date ranges. And then now you want to do this across Microsoft, Google, Amazon ads, Facebook ads. Right now we need to start looking at APIs that kind of pull into these various systems, bring it back together into one place. And especially with budgets, right? So if we find something we need to spend a couple of $1,000 more, what's the best place? Well, a script and its limitation is that it's going to spend that money within AdWords, but maybe that wasn't the most efficient place for it. And that's when we start looking at APIs that can go across different ad channels.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually a big fan of a lot of the built-in automations that are out there. Again, from the bidding standpoint, they're better than they have been in a long time. I used to fight them hardcore. Let there be no question about it. Total control freak.
We all did.
But now I buy into them. They have a tendency to work a lot better than they used to. I think that the systems have learned, and I think there's I don't want to call it Amazoning something, but I think there's a level of the people monitoring what scripts are running, or at least understanding the use cases enough where the best of the best are getting rolled into the main UI of things. Right, these are the terms that searches show up for is essentially a really, really light n-gram report. Right, it doesn't really have any data behind it. That's what it is. That's a kind of a cool thing that it's in the system now. So I tend to be pretty pleased about those innovations in there. We're not very API friendly in terms of the stuff that we do for size and other things like that. the other thing I'd say between the two is there's a learning process between scripts and automation that's kind of cool. When you start running your own scripts, you understand how the automation works better, and you feel more comfortable with it. And vice versa. I think if you start running automations and you realize that the automation isn't doing exactly what you want to do, and you realize where the fault is, then you can write a script to fix that.
And one key point I heard you make, Steve, was you're basically putting your agency at the cutting edge by being the one that develops things that eventually Google may put in the interface where it's available to the masses. But as an agency, you need to have a value proposition, right? And your value proposition is that you are pushing those boundaries, and you're ahead of Google in many ways. And Google being such a big organization, even if they want to do something, even if they know that it's the right thing to do, it can take them years at this point, right? I mean, one script I've recently built is an experiment dashboard. Google is big on drafts and experiments, and they show them in the UI. But if you have an MCC account and you're doing 10 experiments in 50 accounts, you have to look at 500 pages just to know what's going on. Like, I'm certainly not going to do that, not even every week, right? So we just wrote a script that pulls in the experiment data, puts it all on a spreadsheet. Now I got one place that's got my 500 experiments with the results right there. And I can see, oh, this one seems to be doing really well. And then I go to that specific page to make a tweak to it or to end it or to promote it. Right? And I'm sure Google knows this is not ideal in the UI, but I wrote that script 6 months ago, and I bet you it's going to be at least another 18 months before we see any of this in the Google Ads interface.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. The more complex the interface gets, harder it is to surface those things, right? And there's a lot of complexity to that interface. Everybody that I teach PPC to is like, wow, when they first look at it, right? Just because it can do so much. And extracting the things you care about the most for you is powerful.
That's why they had the AdWords Express, right?
Yeah.
Nobody use AdWords Express, please, if you're listening to us.
Yeah.
It is. If you ever want to do automation, don't use AdWords Express. Don't use, they call it Smart.
Don't use AdWords. Sorry, that was hard. Sorry, Google.
All right, good. So there's not a lot of news this week, so I think we're going to skip that. Usually we do a little segment about news, but we're in the doldrums of summer, so not much is happening, at least in the PPC world. In the rest of the world, there's a ton of stuff happening. But we're coming close to the end of time, or the end of our time here on this call. So I want to give you each a chance to maybe talk about something that you're working on, something we haven't covered today that you think is important. And then we'll wrap it up. So I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll go first because it's a passion of mine. We're holistic in terms of the way we view as an agency, and I think one of the beauties of where all of this is going in the future is for us to focus a lot less on things like Skags and account structure and the tactical stuff, and have the opportunity to be better marketers. So take the opportunity now. It would be my one advice for the entire industry, and go out there and kill it as a marketer. That means going beyond just the messaging of what you're doing or just the experiments. Reach into the product of the customers you're working with. Make suggestions on ways to improve them. That's part of marketing. Our chance to be consultants is here. Our chance to be more than just tacticians is here. So I think it's one of the greatest opportunities I've seen in a long time. So take it.
Wise words, be a better marketer. And by the way, for anyone who needs some help and is considering talking to the Hammer, I think you guys won Best Small Agency of the Year.
We did years back. Yep. So somewhere I have the tile. I don't know where it is anymore. But
the US Search Awards.
Yep.
Small Agency of the Year. And I don't know what you put in that study or the case that you submitted. Do you think it was at all based on doing scripts?
I think it was a combination of things, actually. When we submitted for that, it was our whole suite, right? So it wasn't just a PPC at the time. I think they've split that award out to things now. So we put in an SEO case study where we were dominating a keyword and looking at the profitability of what people were doing. We were talking about what we were doing with scripts and educating and evangelizing at that time. We had a couple of PPC case studies in there, so it was a really breadth of what we were doing at that point that I think got us that.
Nice. Well, congratulations on getting that. Thanks for joining.
We were pretty pleased.
Nils.
Right, yeah, so if I can do, I'd like to do a shameless plug on a new service I'm working on, actually. When I do training for scripting, I get a lot of questions on what scripts I should be using. Many people know there are many scripts out there, but they have a hard time figuring out what scripts make the most difference to their specific account. So I decided to sort of like create a scripts done for you service where you and I, or the client and I, will select up to 5 scripts and we install them together. So that way people without any coding skills or who are afraid of scripts have the opportunity to actually start using scripts in their specific accounts. And they have me to guide them to install and configure the scripts that we both think would make the most difference to the specific account. So I'm really excited to be hopefully launching that service next month. And yeah, if people are interested, they can definitely get in touch.
Sounds exciting. And I hope some of the scripts that people select are the ones that I wrote.
Most probably.
Would make me very happy. And by the way, since we're on shameless plugs, I do have to put in a shameless plug for Optimizer. So we have a system, we call it Enhanced Scripts. And so if you'd like to do scripting, we put a generic piece of code, a snippet, in your scripting section in the Google Ads account. And that basically connects to our service. And through our service, that's where you enable the scripts you want to run. You put in the settings through a nice form-based UI. So you never have to touch a single line of code beyond just copying and pasting a snippet into your ads account. Very similar to what you would do for Google Analytics. So it is the no-code way to do scripting. And then we also have a tool, a capability that we call the rule engine. So that is more of a drag and drop based flow builder. That's very similar in what it can do to scripts, but it gives you full customization. And so you can really create those automations any way that you see fit. And again, there's no code involved from your end. So that's all from Optimizer. So good. Well, thank you both for joining me and talking about scripts. This was fun. I miss talking to you guys in person at conferences. And I actually saw you. Right. My last trip I got to do before COVID was to the Netherlands. So we got to say hello to each other. And Steve and I were just talking that PubCon might actually happen in person. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not sure that I'm going to be willing to travel, but if it does, that's usually where you and I will meet. So looking forward to those days again. And thanks everyone for watching. We'll be back again for the rest of August. We have episodes coming up. Another one on video. So the most popular one from last month, we're going to run another session with Corey and Joe Martinez on video. And we're also going to have Google joining us in 2 weeks, and they're going to be talking about getting ready for e-commerce in Q4 with all your shopping ads. So Google's going to be on that call, and we have 2 great shopping experts joining that call as well. So join us for the next PPC Town Halls, read our blog recap, subscribe, get all the resources on the website. Nils, Steve, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
It's a pleasure.
Take care, guys. Thanks for having me.